So the 3 weeks before Lent, we start to meditate upon the last things and our own mortality. And so we celebrate Sundays of those who have gone before us. Today, the Sunday of deceased priests. The Church, throughout the centuries, has developed various seasons throughout the year to help us in our path of life. As we walk through the path of life spiritually, when we go through different seasons and different Sundays, it helps us to focus ourselves and go more deeply into sharing in the life of Christ and reflecting on our own life so that we can focus more clearly on heaven. So our ultimate goal is to reach heaven, and many things distract us. So right now, as we start to think about our own finality, our own death, it helps us to let go of the things that are not important in this life and to focus on that final goal on our journey there. It isn't by accident that the 3 Sundays begins with the celebration of the Sunday of deceased priests. In these Sundays, we think of the glory of heaven, and so it encourages us to get there. But it isn't by accident that it begins with deceased priests. Because without the priesthood, we would not have a church. Without the priesthood, we would not have the sacraments. And without the priesthood, there would be no entry into heaven. So let me backtrack and explain, just for a minute or two, about what all this means and why it is. Christ is the high priest. He was sent by the Father to the earth to redeem the human race. And as he was becoming incarnate, he said, "Sacrifices of animals and burnt offerings you did not desire, but the body you have prepared for me." That is, his whole intention was to offer himself for the salvation of the human race. And then coming into the world, he was already consecrated by the Father to accomplish this purpose. And his very life was a life of consecration focused on this purpose. And then, before he was crucified, he once again said in front of his disciples that he is consecrating himself now. So the fullness of the consecration was total. That is, he lived a life of consecration with focus on his mission, focus on his sacrifice, and then it was complete consecration, that is, a complete self-sacrifice on the cross. And this is then the essence of the priesthood. He offered himself as the living sacrifice. He offered himself, and he himself became the sacrifice. And through his offering, he opened the gates of heaven. In heaven, his wounds are still open. His heart is open for all who would come to him, and he can forgive those who repent and receive them into his heart. So the sacrifice of Christ is an eternal sacrifice. It happened, but it didn't pass. It's a sacrifice that is living and continues for eternity. And so he is the eternal high priest. And Christ then shared his priesthood with human beings. So he called his disciples to this priesthood. He consecrated them and sent them as the Father sent him and consecrated him. And so Christ ordained his disciples, his 12 disciples, to continue the mission of the priesthood and sacrifice, reflecting him into the world. And so he ordained his disciples and said, "Do this in memory of me." Likewise, his disciples imposed their hands on those that that would succeed them, the bishops and the priests. And they would carry this mission of Christ into the world. Likewise, from generation to generation, the bishops would ordain other bishops and priests to continue this ordination, this mission that Christ sent his disciples to accomplish. And so when the priest stands at the altar, he is standing in the person of Christ. He was ordained by Christ to the hands of the bishop. And when he stands in the person of Christ, you see Christ. And the bread and the wine are then consecrated, and the people can have the life of Christ in them. And so the life of Christ continues then in the church, and the church is able to exist. Without the sacraments, there is no church. And without the principal sacrament of the Eucharist, there is no life of Christ in the world. So Christ continues in the world through the sacraments, and his life is in us. Now, let me switch gears and talk about something different, but it's related. I want to share with you my thoughts and the story about before I became a priest, before I even went to the seminary. I didn't know it at a young age that God was calling me to be a priest. And I remember in high school, I would catch a bus to school and back. And riding in the bus, I would sit on the window, and as the bus is passing, I would see the world passing by. And I would think to myself, the world is so filled with trouble. And look at people around. They're so confused and so filled with problems. I have to do something different in my life. I have to do something to try to change the world. I have to put my part into it to try to change it. But I didn't know what that was. I didn't even know what priests do. But through my young years, it seems that God was already implanting in me a thought, because he was going to call me. Maybe he was already calling me and I was closed to that calling. But a few days before I turned 22, I was called, and it was clear. But I still didn't know what priests do, and I didn't even know how to say the Hail Mary. But a few months later, I was in the seminary, and there I started studying. And of course, you study and study and study, and you train, but you still don't know how to be a priest until you become a priest. Just like being a parent. You can learn all about it, read all about it, but you still don't know how to be a parent until you are a parent. And then you learn with the experience of being a parent. And this is how it is in being a priest. But it's funny because when I was in the seminary, I would meet different people, and oftentimes it would be the older ladies. They would come and say, "Oh, you're becoming a priest? Oh, no, you're not getting married? Oh, no, what a shame, what a loss." And throughout my whole seminary days, I would meet different people. They would always say the same thing: "Oh, what a loss, what a shame." And then when I became a priest, now it was the older men who would come and say, "Oh, you made the right choice." I said, "Okay." So they would say jokingly, but sometimes I would wonder, are they really joking at this time? And then I would say to myself, they don't know what they have, the treasure of what they have. And I would say that, and I still think that, but not with a sense of judgment, because maybe if I was married, maybe I too would have problems with my wife and vice versa. So I'm not judging anyone, but it's natural, people have problems, with each other. But it's a treasure to be married. And I'm not saying that because I feel any sense of loneliness or anything like that. I never have. As a matter of fact, any kind of problems that weigh on me and the great anxiety that I often carry, as soon as I receive Holy Communion, everything disappears. And it's as if all things are possible. Christ is there. Christ is in me. And I hope that you feel the same when you receive communion. Pray deeply, and He'll be there, and everything will be okay. I'm saying this because a thought came to me that priesthood and married life are related. In priesthood, you bring communion to the people, and the people have a piece of heaven in them. And in married life, a man and a woman share communion together. And then they share the communion with their children. Flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone, shared together. And then these families share communion with one another in a parish setting. And then the whole church of Christ together all around the world. How beautiful that is. And it begins with a couple, a family, families, church, and the whole church of Christ. And He living in everyone through the priesthood, through married life. How amazing that is. I see myself, and priests are kind of the husbands of the parish. Likewise, the husband or father is the priest of the family. You see how it's related? The theology can get very deep, and you can read about it, but that's what it is. It's really amazing and beautiful. And we don't do it perfectly in our relationships, but we always pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so we always try to correct ourselves. If I do something wrong, I try to reach out to reconcile. And likewise, I hope it's the same between husband and wife and family members and within our community. I would never recommend for anyone to be a priest. It's the craziest thing. It really is. You're standing at the altar with the piece of bread in your hands, and suddenly it comes alive and it's fire, living fire in your hands, and you're sharing it now with all the people. What an amazing thing. Undescribable. And then you're ministering to people, telling them things that can affect their whole life and their whole eternity. And you're dealing with eternal souls. How? No, I don't recommend that. But if God calls you, then you better answer. You better answer. If God calls you to the priesthood, or to be a sister, or to be a deacon, if God calls you to be married, that is a calling too, it's a vocation. Answer. If God calls you as a single person to a particular thing, listen to Him. It's hard to volunteer it, but if He calls, you go all in. And it's the most beautiful thing to be in the mystery and to be invited to sacrifice yourself. How beautiful.